So I actually finished reading this book like a week ago, but I needed to wait until my good friend Danny here was done so that we could review it together. Isn't that right, Danny?
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
So, Promise of Blood is something that started off great. I mean, it started off fantastic. It had a great, unique story concept. It had really interesting, unique characters that I haven't quite seen before. It had a fantastic magic system, which I haven't seen done before. And the whole thing was just totally fresh and new. Like I haven't seen any fantasy do this sort of thing before. At least, not that I can think of off the top of my head. And after a little while, it just sort of slipped away, and it became more cliched, it became more generic, more just average. You know, I wasn't really able to get into it very much after the first 150 pages. So, while I just have difficulty even thinking about whether or not I like this one, because, well, yeah, I do like it. It's just difficult to say how much I like it. So the closest thing to a main character in this book is this guy named Tamas, and he is a field marshal in the military of a country called Adro, and at the very beginning of the book, he just staged a coup and overthrew the king. And he, near the beginning, he executes all the nobility, and it's like total French Revolution style, although much less complicated and easier to follow than the real French Revolution, mind you. And as he's performing the coup, there's a mage that kills a bunch of his soldiers and then runs off, and he hires someone to he gets this other soldier to follow her and try and find her and get rid of her. Meanwhile, a bunch of the mages that he killed during the coup were also talking about something called Cresemir's Broken Promise, and he hires another guy to try and figure out what that means. And Tamas is also trying to hold the country together and form a new government and kill off all the royalists that are against his new government, and just all sorts of crazy shit. So the first problem with this is that there's a little too much going on at first. Like, individually, all of these things are kind of good, but they don't flow together as well as you might think. Like, there's two separate investigations going on with two separate dudes, and as much as I hate to say it, neither of them is particularly interesting in terms of the investigating. Like, the dude, Adamat, is the one that's investigating the Cresemir's Broken Promise stuff, and he's finding out that someone's trying to cover up or destroy a lot of the information about it, and it has something to do with, like, their god who used to live on Earth or something. Yeah, it's kind of hard to follow, to be honest. Like, their god was called Cresemir, and he used to live on Earth, and the mages made some sort of promise or something. It was kind of weird and difficult to understand. So honestly, right off the bat, I just would have cut that out entirely. The second investigation, where the other guy, his name escapes me right now. It's been a while since I read this book, and he's honestly not that interesting of a character. But he's Thomas's son, and he's also a powder mage. And when he's looking for this mysterious mage, who's also extremely powerful, I should add, that storyline is more interesting just because it has more action and actually doing things in it. Like, he actually fights the mage several times and sees, oh, holy shit, this bitch is powerful. And so that makes it more interesting. But he also, that storyline kind of dies off in a very unsatisfactory way, less than 200 pages in, and this book's like 550 pages. So, yeah, that one, if you tweaked it a little bit, had some more time to develop it, it could have been a lot better. And then the third storyline, which was definitely the most interesting to start with is Tamas. He's just taken over the country and he's trying to establish his authority and get rid of all the people that are trying to kill him and find traitors amongst his ranks and stuff. And that's the most interesting part by far, but out of the three, it also gets the least amount of screen time. So, yeah, that's that's disappointing. And near the end, it goes a lot more into the whole traitor aspect and who's trying to kill me? What's going on? And it's just not done all that well. It's not that it's done badly, I shouldn't say, but we never really get a chance to know most of the possible traitors, and so it's a lot harder to try and figure out on your own, like, oh, okay, that's who did it. And when they reveal it, when they reveal who it is, you're just kind of thinking, oh, well, all right, I guess that's fine. No, it's not really a surprise per se, because it's impossible to really guess. And again, there's just so many characters and so much storyline and crammed into the space that it's very easy to lose track of what's going on and become confused. So, yeah, that even though that was the most interesting part of the story, it was still very disappointing after a while. It started off good, though. And a big part of why the story just stops being interesting after a while is that the characters stop being interesting after a while. Like, you have Tamas, who is, he starts off great. He's a very unique main character, or closest thing to a main character, I should say. Like I said, he doesn't get all that much screen time, but, he's very unique. He's not like some farm boy that got swept up in an adventure. He's not a chosen one in some sort of prophecy. He's just a dude who came to power in the military and saw that his country was basically being destroyed from within and from without, and so he decides, fuck it, I'm taking over and I'm gonna fix this shit. And that's a very, very great idea. He's clearly inspired by Napoleon Bonaparte, but I don't think he's really based on him per se. Like, again, they're both dudes that were very successful in the military until they decided to take over their home country. But this book seems to be, Tamas doesn't seem to have Napoleon's arrogance, and also he's powder mage, so a little bit different there. The second thing that's the closest to a main character in this book is Taniel, Thomas's son. Yeah, I remembered his name. We're good. And again, at first, he's kind of interesting. He's also a powder mage, and he's having a lot of personal problems in his own life. Like his fiance just left him, and he's also trying to wonder, like, if he ever really loved her at all. And so he just doesn't know what direction to take in his life. And then out of nowhere, his dad's like, hey, I just took over the country and I need your help to stabilize things, and I need you to find this crazy powerful wizard and kill her. And so he's basically using all that to distract himself from his personal problems. But that kind of wears thin after a while, and you're like, okay, well, what else is there to this guy? And there really isn't that much. Like, he has a couple of friends that he talks to, and I guess watching their friendship is alright, but there's just not all that much to him. He's just kind of... And they treat him like he's some sort of ultra mega badass, but I mean, I didn't get that much out of it. He's competent, sure. He knows what he's doing in combat, but he's just not really that cool or exciting, I should say. So he's not that great at either. And then the third guy that's the closest to a main character in this, and is definitely the weakest by a pretty big margin, is Adamat. And again, he starts off cool. He's a private investigator who is trying to find out what Kresimmir's broken promise means. He's very smart. He's not so much a fighter, but he can handle himself if he needs to. And watching him investigate is kind of fun, even if the investigation isn't that good. But after a while, that storyline also dies out, and they have him doing other things, and it just kind of gets lost in the jumble along with everything else. And Adamat's just not that interesting. I'm gonna say it. He's a competent investigator, but he doesn't have all that much personality. He loves his family, I guess, but that's really it. He's smart, and that's all there is to him, so he's not all that much fun to read about. The one thing that stuck with me with this throughout this whole book, and didn't really get bad near the end, is all the magic and world building is still really fun. Like in this, there's 3 different types of magic. There's privileged, who are people that are just born like with magic, and they have, you know, typical fantasy magic. They just shoot out fire and lightning and shit, and that's actually pretty neat. And then there's knacked, who are just people that are born with some strange ability. Like there's one dude in this who just doesn't need to sleep. There's another guy who never forgets anything. It's just it's kind of interesting. And then the third one, which is the most most unique by far, are powder mages, and they are like all their magic just comes from gunpowder, which is strange. Like they can literally snort it up their nose or put it on their tongue or something, and it'll put them into a sort of trance, and it just makes them more resistant to damage, and they can like they're a little bit stronger and faster. It's weird. And they can also control gunpowder and make it explode whenever they want, and they can also redirect the force from an explosion of gunpowder. And so all that together, it's actually really cool. It has very specific limitations. It's a unique idea. It's kind of cool to see it done in practice. Like the whole powder mages stuff is really, really cool, and I liked the magic and everything. And the city that most of the book takes place in is the capital of Adro. It's called Adapest. Adapest. Yeah, words are hard, sorry. And it actually feels like a real city. You know, there's different districts. Like, you can feel the difference between rich areas and poor areas. Like, it feels like a real city with a long history to it and everything. So that's really cool, actually. But everything outside of that is meh, not bad, just kind of meh, it works. You know, we don't really know all that much about Adro, except that it's supposedly really good at manufacturing, has a high industrial output. And then there's another country nearby called Kez, which wants to go to war with Adro, and they're apparently much bigger, but they're also more agricultural, so okay, that's about all we get, honestly. And they don't explain all that much about their religion. I think I already mentioned that. It's kind of confusing and poorly told. We don't really get all that much into the politics of this world. So it's fine for the most part, but the magic and everything, that's really good, actually. That brings it up quite a bit. So I don't think there's much else to say. This book was, you know, I'm not going to call it bad. It's not bad by any means. It's fun for a long time, it's good for a long time, and then it just kind of drops off. And at the end, there's definitely a cliffhanger at the end, but what happens at the end should have happened like 150, 200 pages earlier in the story. So I'm not sure if I want to read the next one. And this one, if you really, really want to read something that starts off unique and then sort of slides into traditional generic fantasy, then I guess this would be for you. Or if you just want to read traditional generic fantasy with a little bit of uniqueness sprinkled on top, then you'd probably enjoy it. For me, this just wasn't different enough. So I don't think I'll read the next one.